No doubt that all of us have had the experience where we've seen a beam of light perhaps coming through a window and been able to observe all the particles of dust as they fly around according to the prevailing energies of nature in that beam of light. But if we take our hand and pass it through that beam, all of a sudden all the particles of dust begin to fly in all directions in seeming chaos. Now, these two little stories are like the hand passing through the ray of light. There was a certain seeker who travelled a great distance to come into the presence of Mulla Nasruddin. And when he arrived there, he begged Mulla Nasruddin to take him as his student and teach him what he knew. And then he proceeded to tell the Mullah of all the masters that he'd studied with and all the teachings that he'd read and studied. Mulla Nasruddin stroked his beard, shook his head, and said, instead of you studying the masters and all the teachings, it should have been the masters and the teachers studying you, and then we could have talked business. And then there was this little mayfly. You know, little mayflies only live for a day. And this little mayfly came out of his egg, but his wings were quite weak. So when he started to fly, instead of soaring off into the air, he fell into a pail of milk that the farmer had just taken. Now the farmer took the pail of milk and took it into the kitchen where the cook was going to make pancakes for his master and family's breakfast, and the little mayfly was in this creamy substance flapping around trying to think what he could do, and all of a sudden it came to him, "Oh, great mayfly in the sky, save me, save me. If I remain in this glue, I will not meet my full potential. I will not be able to fulfill my life." Well, it so happened that the cook just happened to notice there was a little black dot in his pail of milk, so he flicked him out onto the table. And the mayfly, trying to clean his wings, and after he'd got his breath, he looked up and said, thank you, great Lord. I heard your booming voice," because as the cook was flicking him out, the cook said, "Get out of there, you filthy little beast. You almost spoiled my sauce." So the mayfly said, "I heard your booming voice, but of course I'm so humble and small I couldn't understand what you were saying. But I promise you that I will dedicate the rest of my life to saving mankind. But, great Lord, you know I'm very tired after this adventure, so I just have to rest for the rest of the day." The mayflies only last. Without giving these stories a thought with our mind and trying to fit them in to maybe what it is that the last weeks and stories have been about, which definitely and distinctly have a pattern to them and a purpose, as you well recognize. But without a thought, what do either of these little stories mean to you? What's the first thing that comes up to your mind relative to either one of these two little tales?
Our mind makes of what we see as it will.
Yes, right. That's right.
Not necessarily as it is, but as we perceive it.
That's right. So we could analyze these little anecdotal stories with our mind and try to fit them into the context of what it is that's been happening. But if we look at the hand passing through the beam of light, and in that beam of light, with all the particles being played on by the prevailing forces of nature, and all of a sudden there's an interference, and they all dance in chaos. How does this relate to our mind? And when we sit here now, having heard these two little tales, and there has been in us a state of receptivity, because after all of this journeying together, we now know that we're not taking in with our minds as they were. Because when we come into this, and even in our life, we're living in a state of Satchitananda, isn't it? So perceptions, whether they be the stories that are told here or the experiences that we have out in life, are being received always and only at that subtle level of mind, which is really no mind. When you come to think about it, that state of receptivity is just that, isn't it? We're just present, we're just here. So what does it mean? And why do we need to pass our hand through that beam of light to create that chaos? Oh, Christmas is coming up. Attempt to elucidate it over the coming days. But who knows? But even Christmas is a state of receptivity for mankind. We experience it because we've made our spiritual journeying. But everyone else is riding on those winds of the prevailing forces of nature. And in the past, with this Christ energy, as you can call it, and the time when the Buddha's birthday is around, and all of these times when people gather together to worship and to give devotion and all, there's a heightened state, isn't there? Mm-hmm. But now, just between you and me, don't tell anyone, this Christ energy is now gone, pretty much. Wisps are around. So there's a vacuum kind of been created. So people are out there still worshipping, still doing the old practices. They still play jingle bells down in the supermarkets, although it's much more muted than it used to be, I've noticed. But they're just going through the motions now, don't you feel? And behind that, there's a kind of space, a receptivity. And this is a wonderful thing that puts us in a place where we can know what we do, because we're the hands that wave through the beams of light. But maybe we'll elucidate it and maybe we won't. You know what I'm talking about.